at a homeware store and he helped Alex pick the paint.
Yeah, I think we can definitely rule out Rachel.
Yeah.
That didn't make no sense whatsoever. I stick a 5 on Alex. You put a 5 on Alex?
Alex, have a word.
I think it's Rachel, but I'm going to go with my team and say it's Alex.
Right. Would you please reveal your
Which time do you get?
The second time.
Hello, Dr. League. How are you?
Good. Yes, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine also. Thank you.
It's
Hello,
good.
Vinodji.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Elizabeth. How are you? All well?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yes, it's good to see you. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir.
Hi,
Hello. How are you,
good
Rupali?
afternoon.
Fine, ma'am.
Good.
Good afternoon to Professor Dimitri.
Yes,
Welcome after
I'm
a
here.
long time.
Vinod Dumbilkar, I see you.
Oh.
Thank you for invitation.
Good to see you here, but we cannot see you also.
Yeah.
Ah, Dimitri. Yeah.
Your screen is empty.
Well, it's blue.
Yes, it's blue, so it's not empty actually. I hope that is not Dimitri's mood on the
Oh
screen.
no. So I have seen your notes, Jigyasu. I will stick very closely to the time frame. It's good to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we are coming to the end of summer in India, but in Australia, but it's not getting any cooler. How is it in India?
It's started to warm up.
Ah,
The temperatures are higher by about 10-15 degrees in some
Oh.
places.
okay.
In the south, cities like Bangalore, I believe, are close to 40 degrees already,
Oh,
and it's not yet summer.
no. Well, it was 36 for us today, and
Oh,
it's end of summer. Yes, so
that's hot.
it is, and they're saying we don't expect it to get cool quickly.
Is that a dry heat or is it humid?
Today it was fairly dry, yes, but some days it can be very humid. But today it was quite dry, just dry and hot.
Okay, that's a little tolerable.
Yeah, yes, yes. And Dimitri, can you
Yes.
hear
I'm here. I'm looking at your face and your speech and expecting to have a lot of pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a while since I've heard your voice. It's good to hear it.
Yes, the voice is the same and person also.
Yes. And how's your grandson? Growing quickly?
Yes, always busy. Guitar, football, drawing, running,
Oh,
and so on. Active person.
Yes.
So I understand that it is a very difficult time because the temperature is rising up and it makes your presentation also speed up it because when it is hot, people are trying to do things faster.
Well, it is night now, so it's not quite so hot, but I do have some air conditioning on still. So I will try and go at a reasonable speed,
I see.
not too fast.
So it is a time not to ask you about other things. We are waiting for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dimitri. Okay. Rupali and Jigyatsu, when you're ready.
Yes, Rupali ma'am.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you for joining us for the second webinar of the series, session 2025 in our webinar series, Pratiti, organized by the Center of Excellence in Simulation and Gaming at Shri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya, Indore, India. We are delighted to commence this season with another insightful session on very interesting topic. Don't be afraid. A topic contribute to information about how to help those who are hesitating to take the risk of using simulation, acknowledge and address their fears and become effective users of simulation and games in education. And the speaker of the session is Dr. Elizabeth Lee. 2017 Ray Page Award for Lifetime Achievement in Simulation, life member of ESAGA Simulation Australasia, visiting academic faculty of engineering and IT at University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. We are honored to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Lee, who is a distinguished educator and expert in experiential and simulation-based learning. With over 40 years of experience, she has been at the forefront of designing and managing simulation that replicate real-world conditions, empowering learners to develop and refine their skills effectively. Dr. Leeks is the co-author of Facilitating Simulation in 2024, written alongside Dr. Laurie Levesque. She has played a pivotal role in the International Simulation and Gaming Association, ESAGA, and Simulation Australasia, serving as General Secretary of ESAGA for 4 years. Her remarkable contributions in the field were recognized with the prestigious Ray Page Award for Lifetime Achievements in Simulation in Australia. In July 2024, Dr. Lee co-presented at the International ESAGA Summer School at Charles Darwin University, Sydney, focusing on the design and facilitation of simulation and games. Her extensive research and publication highlight the critical skills required for effective simulation facilitation, bridging the gap between theory and practical applications in education. So, we are delighted to have Dr. Lee here share her insight with us today. Without further ado, it's my honor to invite Dr. Elizabeth Lee to lead today's session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rupali. I'll just share my screen. Oh, is that working?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Sorry,
I think you got the wrong screen, Elizabeth.
I do have the wrong screen, but I thought I picked the right one. This one. It should be that one. That's it. Now
Yes.
Right. Okay. So thank you after that technical glitch. I called the session "Don't" in brackets be afraid, because in some ways I think it's really important when you're running simulations or designing them or planning to use them that you are a little bit afraid. I always liked the story of the British actor who was known to be an amazing stage actor and a film actor, but was also known to often be ill in his room before he went on stage because he was so afraid. And yet us in the audience didn't know, but he saw that fear as part of the build-up, part of the energy that we then saw on stage as beautiful acting. So the "don't be afraid" is about recognizing that fear and no fear are two sides of a coin. And I'm just sort of was thinking that if you saw this character coming towards you down a dark alley, you'd be very frightened. It looks very scary. There's nothing to tell you what they're about. But if you then see them in this setting where they're simply an actor on stage among a whole lot of other actors, we aren't afraid of it. So there's fear and no fear on both sides. And what I'm asking or inviting people tonight is to think about how can you use your fears to be an effective facilitator, and what do you need to know to make sure that your fear doesn't run away on you, doesn't take control of you. So the image on one side is a dangerously strange thing coming at you, and on the other side, it's just an actor. So somebody also said, but I couldn't find the reference for it, is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I'm sure somebody out there can tell me who said it. But that is part of what I find important for facilitating. So, right, okay. So I wanted to set the scene a little bit in that we all play to learn. Even as old as I am, I still play to learn. I had to learn to use a new app on the computer today. So I played with it, made lots of mistakes. And we all do that, except we're often when we're in formal educational settings. So why is it that formal education avoid play as a learning strategy? And I've got three possible answers, but there may well be more. The first is that formal education focuses on knowledge, the knowing about things, and pays, except in some areas, less attention to skills, to knowing how. And you learn knowledge by memorizing it. And the second one is there's a lack of expertise in using simulation. So educators themselves are concerned not to use something that they're not familiar with. And then the third thing, which is the topic for tonight, is fear. What is it that we are afraid of? And why do we allow fear to inhibit our endeavors and deaden our creativity? So, why are we afraid? Often I think we're afraid because we think we should know it all before we begin. We're supposed to be experts. We're supposed to be the people that other people look to for guidance and information. And if we don't know it, then we may often feel that we're lost at the beginning. Instead of being in charge, we're suddenly lost, like the people in the cartoon. Which way do we go? How do we get there? So, what is there to be afraid of? Well, I've got a long list, and I'm sure that many of you would be able to add to the list. But one of the really top ones is we're afraid of making a mistake. Education, and having been in education for a long time, as Rupali pointed out, I'm really sad that one of the things that education does is make us afraid of making mistakes. And yet we only learn by making mistakes. Edison, I'm sure you'll all know the quote, all those thousands of times he failed to get a light bulb and he just said, no, I now just know all those thousands of ways of not making a light bulb. He didn't learn that making a mistake is a problem. But we might feel foolish, we feel embarrassed, we might be afraid to deliver what was promised. We find that we might lose face, the respect of others. We may feel humiliated. I'm not expecting anyone's read my doctorate, but part of what prompted me to write my doctorate was having a student in my class who unexpectedly felt that something I was asking her to do would humiliate her, and she did her best to make sure that I never taught again. It was an interesting struggle, and that whole idea of humiliation having such a strong drive, a fearful drive, it was a real surprise to me. The other thing that came to me late is that some people don't like being on stage, and yet when you're an educator using simulation, you're on stage. You can't avoid it. So there's the list of things that I could think of that we might be afraid of. I'm sometimes thinking, like all the stones on the beach, there may well be others I haven't thought of. So here are some deterministic ways to avoid those fears. In formal education, we have nice, tight, orderly structures. So the structure carries us along. We know exactly where we're going and what we're doing. We've been given clear directions, and we can hand those clear directions on so we feel safe and encompassed. We know what lies ahead. Every step has been set out for us. We've got a learning design plan that's got step by step by step by step. We know that knowledge is a commodity to be transferred, so we can put it in packages. We can present it tidily. We don't have to deviate because all it's there, the pathway is already nice and clear. We can use lots of repetition, so doing the same thing over and over, because that way people feel comfortable that they've got it, and memorizing. So there's some of the ways that we can avoid the fears. But the truth is, for me, that simulation simply points out that these are not as adequate ways for learning as we would sometimes wish, because learning has to be at times untidy. It has to be disorganized. It has to come at us in different speeds, in different ways, if we're really going to make it our own. While we only use these forms of teaching and learning, we're only taking on somebody else's knowledge. We do not own our own knowledge. And I have to say, in 2025, owning our own knowledge and being clear about what it is has never been more important. So in this way, we've got data matching tidily across the hills, like the hotel on the picture behind me, and facts follow neatly in a line. But we all know that in simulation, that doesn't necessarily happen. Because, and I'll walk you through this slowly, this is a map that I drew with my writing colleague, Lorraine Spindler, to try and look at what are all the factors that we're actually managing when we're in a simulation. We've got a facilitator, we've got a context, we've got a group, we've got relationships between the facilitator and the group, we've got the context and the facilitator needing to interpret things like expectations and perceptions. We've got the needs of the group in the context. We've got how the facilitator uses power. And we've got issues like how emotionally mature the group is. All of these things, nice, neat drawing as it is, they're all in play. I can't make them all move at once, but if you can imagine it all shimmering and shifting, because these are the forces that are happening. They're moving all the time. So, as I said at the beginning, I really do understand why being afraid is part of the process. And being afraid is quite simply something we have to manage and learn to live with. So, one model that I use to help me understand how to manage my fears is this one. It's called the Cynefin Domains of Knowledge, spelt Cynefin. And it's from the field of knowledge management, and I'll step you through it slowly so you have an idea of it. It actually says knowledge is delivered to us in one of 5 contexts or domains. And although the image looks like there's only 4, I'll show you the 5th one at the end. And it's in some ways the most important one. So on the bottom left-hand side, we've got the clear domain. In the clear domain of knowledge, everything, we make sense of it readily. We know how to sort it, categorize it, and then we know how to respond. So tonight, when we all came online, everyone knew I would be the one talking. Rupali would be doing the introductions. Jigyasu would be opening the session. So we knew our places. It was clear, orderly, and best practice. In a university, we then move into the complicated domain, or in any formal, well, or informal education process where we're actually going to work on much more complicated things. So up in the top right-hand side, in the complicated domain of knowledge, we have to analyze. So as lecturers, as educators, we give students knowledge, we put them into environments, we ask them to do things, and what they're learning to do is analyze the information. Understanding that we've given them a complex task, they have to analyze it before they can respond to it. It's not just an automatic response. So on that side of the model, when we think about knowledge domains, we're dealing with ordered knowledge, like the hotel marching across the hill in my previous image. It's all there, it's structured, it's beautifully safe and well ordered. But then we step to the left. And on the left-hand side, we have what the model calls unordered knowledge. Now, unordered knowledge comes in 2 domains. The complex domain is one where knowledge is emergent. We don't know what to do. And a lot of the really good simulations, like some of Dick Duke's really good simulations, fall into this domain because that's the world and that's the human experience they're trying to model. And in those games and in that environment in real time, first of all, we've got to probe. We have to go and look for information that will help us make sense before we can decide what to do. So one example that I have for the complex domain is Apollo 13. I'm assuming you've seen the movie or know about the story. The astronauts come on the radio and say, Houston, we have a problem. And the problem is such that there's no certainty that they will get back to Earth. Then, because they're in a stage of safety for the time being, they have time to probe, to find information, to work out what are the possible options we've got? How do we work it out? How do we then plan a response? And again, they only know that the plans that they put in place worked in a complex environment when the astronauts came on the radio and said, we've landed. So in the complex domain, and it's much of the world, and today it's much more of the world than I think ever before, our need is to probe, to make sense, and only then take action. And I'll come back to why this helps me understand when to be afraid and when not to be afraid. The fourth domain is the chaotic domain. Now, here we've just got to take action. And in a simulation sense, the simulations that best manage this are the ones that are designed for emergency management, where people are suddenly thrown into chaos, literally, and have to do something. Only after they've done something, whatever it is, escape from the plane, run away from the flames, grab the hose to put the fire, whatever they do, only after they've done it can they make sense of it. And as they make sense of it, then they can refine their responses. Now, the fifth domain is called confusion. And in confusion, if we have to think of it as a domain of knowledge, like the others, it has its own criteria. But the issue when we are in confusion is that our prior training, our formal education makes us believe that we have to head for the clear or the complicated side of the equation. Confusion makes us afraid. It makes us want things to be stable. But mostly confusion is generated because we are already in a complex or a chaotic domain of knowledge. When we're running simulations, the confusion space is where participants will often go to because they don't know what else to do. And we have to guide them, but not too much, and encourage them to step beyond the confusion to take action in towards achieving the outcomes of the simulation. So it's a very quick walk through the Cynefin domain. And in a little while, I want people to ask me some questions. And I can't see the chat, but please, if you're listening and you've got some questions to put in there, please put them in, because I've allocated time to answer questions and deal with issues. Because this is, for me, the best image I have ever met of how to understand what's happening in people's minds when I put them into a simulation. I know that they've started in the clear domain because it's a formal education process, so they think they know what they're going to get. I know they will very quickly feel that they've got to make sense of it because it's not really clear, so they think they're in the complicated domain. It doesn't take long for them to recognize that they're in the complex domain, and then sometimes all hell breaks loose because we don't often in formal education give people good skills for managing uncertainty. So that's it. Please, questions when I finish this. So there it is in a different format. Information is ordered on the right and unordered on the left. We don't know how knowledge works until we've worked with it. So in the clear domain, sport, skill acquisition, entry-level knowledge, they're the things where we know what to do and how to do them. In the complicated domain, knowledge is hierarchical, it's ordered, it does deal with higher level knowledge, so it is more complex, hence making sense of it. But there are shared perspectives. We understand what's happening, and the environments are still pretty well known to us. Then we move to the left to the unordered domain. There's multiple knowledges. We don't know which path to take. We don't know which piece of equipment is going to help. We have to trial it, which is the word probe is used, but we need to trial it and check it out. In simulations that are asking people to explore the life around them, these are the things that are most important. There will be multiple perspectives. Everybody will see it differently. When Sully Sullenberger landed his plane in the Hudson River, everybody thought it was a miracle and what a fantastic pilot he was. But the Safety Administration Board put his conditions and his situation into their simulators. They got multiple perspectives, and then they called him, he and his co-pilot, up before the board and said, you could have made it back to the airport. Look, here it is in the flight simulators. There you are going back to Teterboro, and there you are going back to the other airport that you left. How could you not take one of those paths? Why did you pick the river? And he had to look at it because he couldn't understand what they were accusing him of. He knew from absolute certainty, from his own perspective, being in that seat in that plane, that the thing he did was the only thing available to him. So he watched the simulators as the pilots went through, following the timeline on the audio in from his plane, and they're flying, right, bird strike, right, now we need to turn around and go back. One simulator flies back to the airport he'd taken off from, the other one flies back to the alternative airport, and they both land safely. There they say, shaking their finger at him, see, you could have done it. Why did you do the river? And he had to think about it. And when he looked at it carefully, what he saw, the simulator was not representing reality. And this is one of the things that we can be very afraid of when we're using simulations, that somewhere in there will be something that is not real. My position on not reality in simulations is you go into it knowing it's not real. You have to look for the spaces and the gaps. You look for the multiple perspectives, and then you help other people see them and explore their own. For Sullenberger, what he said was, but I had to do a whole lot of other tasks as well, which the safety board conceded had not been included in the simulation trials. So they counted to 30 before the pilots were allowed to take any action. And lo and behold, Sullenberger was right. They would have crashed at either airport. He would not have made it back. So you've got those multiple perspectives, and you have to do an awful lot of fast work sometimes. He had 90 seconds. Mostly where I find when you're dealing with a complex situation, you've got more time. Apollo 13 had days to work theirs out. Each environment is unique every time. No matter how often you run a simulation, you will always be running a simulation for the first time to some extent. The players will be different, the room will be different, the weather will be different. It's never exactly the same. So you have to manage for all those things. And you need time to analyze and respond. So when you're dealing with simulations, understanding the difference between refereeing a sporting activity and managing an emergency evacuation flight simulation you now understand that you've got different knowledges and different requirements and conditions of the knowledge that you're working with. You wouldn't manage an emergency evacuation drill the same way you'd umpire a sporting event. So suddenly you're dealing, well, not suddenly, but once you're aware, you recognize you're dealing with different sets of knowledge, and that gives you strength and confidence to not be afraid of what you're being asked to do. Finally, with the chaos one, it starts when you've got to do something in a hurry. It begins with the need to react. There's almost no time. You just have to do it. And you don't know what the parameters are, but only afterwards can you sit back and analyze what did you do. So on this criteria, when you get to the confusion space, that odd shaped figure in the middle, the rule for facilitators is to recognize when the participants are in that confusion space and help them understand that they have left behind that nice, clear, comfortable bottom right-hand space of clarity, and they are actually operating in the top left-hand space of complexity. And the knowledge is still there, it's just got to be dealt with differently. So changing pace, there's the Cynefin model. This one is just about how you might want to do that. If you are a novice educator, you will start with a closed framework. You need to be in control and have authority. So bottom left-hand corner, closed hierarchy. It's the role of the teacher. You've got all the power, you have responsibility for action. If you're debriefing a simulation, you always take it towards your stated goals. I'm stressing there's nothing wrong or out of the place with that. It's just that it is one place, and I'm begging you, don't stay there, because that means you're always going to be limiting yourself and your students to a position of hierarchical power where you're in charge, and all those fears about being caught out and humiliating or being humiliated or losing face and that, they will tie you up in knots. But if you recognize that it's possible to open up the discussion, then on the left in this diagram, you move up to being a moderator. You can give people some decisions. You can say, I don't know everything. Let's see if we can find some things out together. Let's see what you learned in the simulation. So you're actually stepping away from the role of teacher, moderating the learning and encouraging the students to be more comfortable with their knowledge. Once you've done that, you can then move up to the facilitation skills, or for the real role of facilitator. In facilitating simulations, you're sharing the power very clearly. You're giving away authority. You're saying to the students and the participants, whatever you're doing because you are doing it. I'm not making you do it. The game's giving you an environment in which to learn. I trust you to act. I don't know what you're going to do. And then during the debriefing, you guide the exploration. How did it go? What happened? What's it like? And in this one, the open and autonomous approach, what we called improviser, we give the power away. We let anything unfold, and we simply ask the participants, what meaning did you find in the activity? As an improviser, you don't, it's less useful for you to say, now let us talk about the learning goals, and more useful to say, what happened, what was going on, what did you see, what are the outcomes for you? So once you're recognizing the role you've got of teacher, moderator, facilitator, or improviser, and whether you're operating in the closed, hang on, let me go back to, I won't, whether you're operating in the clear domain or the complex domain, you've got a better opportunity to work with your learners, with the participants in your learning space, to build new knowledge that is their own knowledge, but you have contributed to it. And the little orange arrow is simply the path that we suggest you take through it. You don't instantly go from teacher to improviser. There is a path, and that's helps reduce the fear. You don't suddenly step up and go, I'm never going to be a teacher again. I'm going to be an improviser, and that's the way to go, because you haven't learned enough about it. So take your time, think about it, look at what things are fearful for you, and then try and work on those slowly. So you move from teacher to moderator to facilitator to improviser. You move from hierarchy to autonomy for your students, and you move from a very closed, tightly controlled format to a much more open and flexible one. Right, here comes some work, and I will stop sharing in a moment. So what I thought, given what I said in the flyer that I would do, is I'd really like to talk to everyone about what frightens you. So of all this list or all the others, what I'd really like you to do, and I'll just leave those there for a minute for you to remind them, I'd really like you to pick on your device or a piece of paper, write your top 3 fears from this list or any others. What are the things you're most afraid of? For me, what I was most afraid of was making a mistake and not knowing what to do next and losing face. I found those the ones that they were my top 3. But what are yours? What I'd like you to do is choose one. So this is everybody listening who can access the Q&A section in the system. Choose one and post it. My biggest fear is whatever it is. And then I want you to read everyone else's. I'm predicting that all your fears are different. So fear itself is something, but what we are afraid of differs immensely. So that's what I'd like you to do. I'll count to 30. I'm really hoping you're doing it, because I can't see whether you are or not while I'm screen sharing. So I'll go silent for 15 seconds. Okay, now that some things are up, well, I hope people have put things up there. And see, this is an example. I've taken a risk. I'm hoping that you've written things. If you haven't, what do I do next? We'll have to wait and see. So now the next part, I'll stop the screen in a minute. How do we address the fears? Have a look at what everybody else has written and see if you can write a response to somebody else. Somebody who's written a fear that you don't have. How could you help them? Because one of the key issues about fear in an educational context is you need help from your peers to beat the fear, to get over it. So how did you manage their fear? What advice can you give? And, write your ideas. I can see there are some comments in the chat, but yes, thank you. That's great. I've worked out, there you go, learning on the run. I've just worked out how to open the chat while I've got the screen on. So thank you to everybody who's put things up. I'll go and have a look at them more closely in a minute. The next thing for you to put up there is, how can I help you? Do you have an example of a moment when you felt afraid? And can you describe it briefly and then put in a question? So this is going to take a couple of minutes, and I'll respond to as many descriptions as I can, and suggest some ideas. I have been terrified of what I've taken, the position I've put myself in. So one time that I was so afraid that I wanted to run away, I was working in Viljandi at the college there that is part of the University of Tartu. And I had to work with a translator because all of the people that I was going to be teaching spoke Russian and spoke Estonian. None of them spoke English except my translator. I'd never used a translator, and I didn't realize that this was going to happen until I'm standing in front of them. I can still remember the moment of absolute panic when I thought, I've no idea what to do. And I had a wonderful translator who just ever so gently guided me, made sure that I didn't use too many words at once, that I gave him time to translate, that we could answer questions. So sometimes the only way you can help someone is to tell your story of fear, because a fear shared is a fear lessened. So I hope you're writing. And while you write, I'm going to tell you a story. So I'll stop sharing because the story will be in the slides, but I'll stop sharing. So the story is about a colleague of mine who was a junior official in a government department. He was on what they call suspension while a legal matter was being sorted out, but he had a set of very explicit and important skills. So they asked him to design an emergency management, an emergency evacuation program that involved bushwork. He set the process up, he had all the equipment there, and then he sent the teams out to do what was in the scenario. He stayed in the control room and listened as every one of the teams went badly wrong. One of the senior officials broke a leg, they lost a boat, they broke equipment, and he's sitting in the control room listening to all this go wrong. Now, I don't know what I would have done, except maybe grab my car and run away as fast as I could. But what he did was seat the chairs in a circle. They were all coming back to do a debriefing. And he pulled the whiteboard out, and on the whiteboard he wrote in very big print, I accept full responsibility for everything that went wrong. And then he sat in front of the whiteboard. And when they all came in, all full of blame and anger, and there was nothing for them to say. He'd already accepted it. And what he could then do was say, okay, now what did we learn? What do we need to know next? How can we change our behavior? What did this tell us about an organization? And how are we going to improve our skills so we never have to do this again? Now, he told me afterwards that he was terrified of it, but it seemed the most sensible thing to do to handle his fear and also to get to where he wanted them to get to, which was discussing how the department managed its emergency management processes, which up until that time, they hadn't been doing very well. So now what I need to do is have a look at all the questions, and I need to change. I want to change how I'm not seeing you all, but I can't change my view. There we go. Gallery. That's much better. Oh, I can't tell. I tell you what I was looking at. It was most uncomfortable. So I have about 10 minutes left for questions. Wow, look at the Q&A or the the chat. And anything in the Q&A? No. Okay. So in the chat. Thank you, JB. It was Franklin Roosevelt who said we have nothing to fear but fear itself. He said this to reassure Americans during the Great Depression. Okay. Okay. So Vinod's talking about the Hudson case. Vinod is asking if it is a complicated segment. The pilot's environment is known, but he knows what to do. Okay. When you look at the knowledge management framework in more detail, what David Snowden does is talk about a liminal space between complicated and complex. what you're raising, Vinod, is that issue of that liminal space. I would say they were in the complex domain because the knowledge, the environment was such that they had to probe to work things out. And it was the skill of the pilot that enabled really, really fast probing to get to the right answer. If either of the pilots who flew the simulators for the safety board had been in that plane, it would have crashed. It was very, very specifically that pilot's knowledge and capabilities that enabled him to make that really fast decision to do the right thing. In aviation, there's a tool that pilots use called the OODA loop, OODA. Sorry, I just need to. I've suddenly got cold. The OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act. And that applies very much to the complex domain. You're seeing something, you've got to decide where you are in relation to it. Only when you've oriented do you decide, and then you act. So I would put the Hudson one always in the complex domain. So that's the next one. I love JB's forgetting what comes next. No, it's not early onset of dementia. We all do that. And Marika said losing contact, that they don't respond anymore. Okay, and Billy says, my biggest losing my mind and disappearing into nothingness, exhausting yourself. So my answer to Marika, in response to Marika's fear, I would say if I'm beginning to encounter that, I turn the participants in on themselves. And by that I mean, if I feel that I'm suddenly out of touch, they're not following me, or I've got a head full of what Billy describes and I'm not sure where I'm going, my general tactic is to say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, form into threes and discuss this question. So I get them to face each other and talk. And then I've got a breathing space to figure things out again. B, I've shifted them back into themselves. So if I've taken them too far out of themselves and they're lost, then I put them back into themselves. I might say, talk about what I've been discussing for the last 5 minutes, or I might even say, come up with a question that is going to stump me if I figure they've been following it. Or I might say, how would you explain this to somebody else? So something that puts the students, the participants, focusing in on themselves. Because if I try and continue, all that happens is we get further and further away from each other. So Marika, that's my solution.
Yeah. And I've researched the effects of your solution, and it works really well.
Good.
So we get a better learning outcome when you provide these structured, open questions and have them pre-prepare in smaller groups. So I did well with your advice, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
It's now scientific proof.
Thank you. Yes, I need that. Okay, so David Crookle. Oh, then what have I done? David says, forgetting what comes next and getting my ideas up. A risky, scary thing to do, but it's worked most times when I've tried it, is to say something like, I've forgotten what I was going to say, or I'm not sure how I should proceed. What do you think is the most important thing about what I've said? So again, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'll try and get the participants to be talking to themselves. It's constantly for me letting go of the need to be in charge. And if I've totally forgotten, then at least I've got them doing something else. So I've got 5 minutes to go and have a look at my notes and say, yes, I know where I was up to. So Siska says, I'm thinking of the power of vulnerability. Yes, Yes, that is true, Cisco. I do think that is one of the things that I've learned over the years, that your worst response to fear is to pretend to be invulnerable. Your best response is to recognize that you're vulnerable and do something about your vulnerability. Call a 10-minute break, put them into groups, tell them you're going to change place and play a short game, give them a 5-minute writing space. Always, for me, when we get to these things, it's take the focus off me so I've got a chance to recover. Marika said, an option can be in using facilitation design for reflection and debriefing. Have participants prepare first individually and then in the group. Yes. Ask them always. It's kind of a 3-stage process for me. I will ask people to write their own thoughts. Just write what you're thinking. Then I'll say maybe share it with one person, and then those two share it with another two, or put you into 3s and share. Conversation is the most wonderfully powerful tool, and we forget it at our peril if we think we're the one that's supposed to be doing all the talking. And I recognize tonight I'm doing too much of the talking, but this kind of format kind of pushes me in that direction. But I'm going to continue reading the questions. Billy Vale said, I just realized a new topic that I'm interested, anti-fragility. Do I have any experience? Look, let me pause for a minute. Billy, would you like to tell us a little bit about what Taleb is saying, because I can't call it to mind. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I'm reading from Wikipedia, as it's new topic for me. Anti-fragility is a property of systems in which they increase in capability to thrive as a result of stressors, shocks, volatility, noise, mistakes, faults, attacks, or failures. The concept was developed by Nassim Taleb in his book Anti-Fragile and in technical papers. As Taleb explains in his book, anti-fragility is fundamentally different from the concept of resiliency. So it's in simple terms, it's to use everything that is stressful and unpleasant as a method and tool for self-development and learning.
And thank you. That's great. So I hope in some of the ways, some of the things I've been saying fit into that framework, because yes, most of what I did learn from putting myself in positions where I wasn't quite ready or I didn't quite know, and then having to work my way through it. And that's sort of my approach to learning. So yes, I find the concept of anti-fragility reasonably comfortable. But what I have learned is that for some people, it can be terrifying. So for the student that I wrote about in my doctorate, her fear started when she was 12 years old. It came to my environment when she was 40 years old, and it was still such a fear for her that she had to stop me doing what she thought I was doing in any way she could. And that fear that was 28 years in the making was driving her still. And I don't know what happened to her. I know that I learned an enormous amount about fear and managing it, because of course I was terrified by what she'd done. But I had, for me, it was absolutely about, I had to learn from this and grow from it. I did in the end write a 150,000 word doctorate to get myself through it and past it. I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but yes, it's about facing it and saying, okay, this is not going to break me. It can make me stronger, but how do I get there, and what do I need to do while I'm getting there? I have, I think, Dimitri, I have had 8 visits to Russia, and the first time I went was in Isaga in 98, and it was in St. Petersburg, and there was a beautiful reception dinner laid on for us, and then my friend and I, Lorraine, needed to go back to our hotel, and somebody, one of the Russian delegates said, oh, there's no taxis. It was late at night. But what you do is you make sure you stand on the right side of the road, the direction that you need to go in, and just put your hand out. Somebody will stop for you. And if this is a hotel, this is what you tell them you're prepared to pay. And we thought, we really didn't know what to think. I mean, in a strange city, and it's 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, I think it was, and we're told to go downstairs, signal to the first car that goes past, tell them how much we're prepared to pay them, and then trust them to take us to our hotel. I mean, we did, and the driver did. It was such a memorable experience. He had no English, we had no, well, we could say the number of rubles, but that's about all the Russian we had. And it's that kind of stuff, I think, that Taleb's talking about, to take the risk and to think through what you might want to do about it. And yeah, let me see. I saw one from Dimitri. Oh, yes, Dimitri said to please compare the afraidness of thinking and the afraidness of acting. It is such a good question, Dimitri. I could do another whole session on that. But in a way, it's the afraidness of thinking that trips us up. We can so more often go and do things if we don't think about them. The afraidness of acting, it's kind of I don't know, I kind of think of the afraidness of thinking as a huge, big, amorphous cloud that hangs over us, and we walk our heads into it and we don't know where to go, and it stops everything. If we don't allow it to stop us, if we don't allow ourselves to get caught in that amorphous cloud, then we can go and act. And when we've acted, then we've got something on which to base our reflection to think about. So when I was doing the session in Viljandi and listening to the translator tell 40 academic staff what I was saying, but he was saying it in Estonian, I just had to trust him. I couldn't think about what if he's telling them nonsense. There was no point in attempting to do that. I had to trust him. So the afraidness of thinking has to be dealt with through trust. And then the afraidness of acting goes away because we're no longer afraid, we can act. But that's a great question. Do I use physical force to encourage mental afraidness? Physical force. I use physical effort, perhaps not force. I will at times, stand close to people to reinforce something that I've been saying that they don't think that they should do. I will use physical direction, stand up, turn around, go here, don't do that. But I've never thought of it as physical force. But yes, I do use the physicality of movement because that will also change how we're all feeling. For a moment, just the very act of standing up can actually change our physiology enough to reduce fear in both participants and the facilitators. Now, I can see lots more here. Are there other things that people... Marika says, when participants are more prepared to what they may encounter as uncertainty, frustration, etc., they know ahead. Yes, that is absolutely true. And while tonight I've been talking more about how to manage my fear as a facilitator, Marika's really pinpointed an issue. if we know enough about where we're going, then we will be more trusting of the people person who's taking us into the unknown. So yes, I do. When I'm running a big simulation that I know from lots of experience is going to create lots of heartache and lots of concern as people go on, I will give them a lot more information about uncertainty, about trust, about other people's prior experiences, about the encouragement them to come and ask me questions. So all of that to give them guidance as they're going in. But once they're in the process, I won't give them as much. I'll certainly support them. But there is a point at which if you want individual adults to learn their own knowledge, at some point they have to step into the unknown. My motto when I was teaching full time was that I cannot rescue you from the pain of your own learning. Because if learning is, if you're really going to change, if you're really going to go into that transformative space that you say you want to go, then I cannot do it for you. Yeah, I have a T-shirt that a friend gave me, and it says, "I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you." And that's the balancing act that you're doing. You're and appreciating that they are afraid and understanding that they're afraid and continuing to help them do it. That's, to me, that's the magic of good facilitation. So Billy says, I'm noticing a pattern which shows that the worst experience in our life can, with learning, become the most valuable. Absolutely. When I was 22 and I had been teaching for just on 2 years, having studied for 4 years to become a teacher, I encountered a school principal who made sure, and I didn't know that this happened until months later, but he didn't like me. He didn't tell me he didn't like me, but what he did was make sure that I never taught in a high school again. And by the time I found out about it, he'd left town and I was left. It took me 3 years to address that. So I agree, it was at the time the worst possible thing that could have happened. I have continued to learn from that all my life. And most of what I've learned has been about me and how to deal with things. And that's what I'm passing on now. And Jawaha says, a dance between the facilitator and the facilitated. I love it. Both hoping to stay in the ordered domain, but each slipping into the unordered and having to deal with the complexity and potential chaos if the complexity is not handled appropriately. JB, you're writing your doctorate. This is beautiful.
I think I was pointing out, Elizabeth, there's different techniques, and if we use the same technique all the time, it doesn't work. You have to go across into the, as soon as you go into the complex, you need to change your technique to deal with the situation, to bring it back to the complicated, right? So yeah.
But that's a most beautiful phrase, a dance between the facilitator and the facilitated. It's exactly. And fear is part of the beat of the music. And Jigyasu, it's 9:29. I think I've got 1 minute left to say thank you.
Marika's got a hand up, Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Marika.
Yeah, I was connecting to your example and also to the dance, the example of the taxi. Yeah, you didn't have the taxi, and you just had to trust that
Yes.
it was the approach was going to work. I think that's the most essential thing. So you have to have a certain trust between you and the facilitator, between you and the other participants, trust in the learning process, which I call buy into in my research, which appear to be the most crucial factor in the learning process when we studied these 31 case studies. At first, they didn't want to take it in because it was such a vague factor, but I insisted we had it. And the basic thing is trust. And what you always really do so well, Elizabeth, I've experienced you in the past 25 years. You build trust in an instant because you are so open and you're so knowledgeable in your field, but you're also open to anything. So you're not an expert. And
Thank you.
somehow you seem to do that really quickly in every presentation or intervention you do.
And I would say it's my students that have taught me over the years to do that. So yes, I guess the other end of fear is trust, and Marika's said it all for me. So thank you, everybody. Chigyasu, back to you, and Rupali.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And it's was an enriching discussion. And a big thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Lee for sharing her valuable insights, and to all the participants as well as panel members for their active engagement and discussions. Now, to formally conclude the session, I now invite Dr. Jityasu Dubey, coordinator of the Center of Excellence in Simulation and Gaming, to deliver the words of thanks. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you. First of all, our sincere gratitude to Dr. Elizabeth Lee for accepting our invitation to conduct the second session of the year 2025 and 67th of the webinar series Pratiti Becoming Aware. I hope the session is very much helpful for those who are hesitating to take the risk of using simulation, acknowledge and address their fears, and become effective users of simulation and games in education. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your enlightening session.
My
We are
pleasure.
also thankful to the ISAGA for the collaboration and support in organizing this Pratiti Becoming Aware webinar series. My sincere gratitude to Dr. Upinder Dar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Santosh Dar, Rector and Dean of our university, for their continuous guidance and encouragement. And sincere gratitude to our panelists, Professor Dimitri, Mr. Vile, Ms. Yamawa, Ms. Mary Kay, Ms. Siska, Mr. Jawahar, Mr. Team, Mr. Dravid, Dr. Sharmishta, Dr. Vinodji, and other panelists who are present, and all the participants who make this webinar successful. I'm also thankful to Dr. Rupali Bharti and the members of the Center of Excellence in Simulation Gaming for their cooperation. And at last, IT team of the university for their kind support. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Chigyasu. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye. It
Thank
was brilliant.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye
Good
bye.
night.
Thank you. I request all the participants to fill out the feedback form with the link in chat box for receiving your e-certificate. And with this, we conclude today's webinar. And thank you once again to all the participants and our esteemed speaker, panelists, and participants for making this session a success. We look forward for your participation in the next series. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rupali. Good
Bye.
night. Night,
Thank
Dimitri.
you. Good night.
Night, Vinod.
Thank you. Good evening. Good night.
Good night.